you're watching Gearz, brought to you by Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals.
Hey, welcome to Gearz and our next installment on the old Jeepster project. Now, the cool thing about this project is this is something virtually any gearhead can relate to, because we found an old '67 Jeepster convertible that had been sitting neglected for years. And then we started with a simple level 1 restoration, which involves just getting it running and driving safely. So that covers the engine, the brakes, the wiring, the suspension, the fuel system, etc. So now we're going to the next logical step and bumping this thing up to a level 2, and that is the mechanical and cosmetic restoration. This is where you start to make the vehicle look good and make it more pleasurable to drive. So this includes paint, bodywork, interior, glass, weather stripping, wiring, mechanical. It's pretty much everything. So the first thing we did was clean up the top and get it working. Then we pulled out the seats and console. We sucked up the mouse hotel and got rid of the old carpet. Then we cleaned up the floor. Then we laid in some new sound deadener and carpet. Cleaned up the seats. And restored the door panels and console. Now, the key to any restoration project is knowing what to replace and what to keep. Obviously, our carpet was shot, so we replaced that, but our seat upholstery and our top were still in good shape, so we just cleaned those up. Also, remember how faded these side panels were? Well, come to find out, the carpet was still good. It was just faded. So instead of hunting down matching carpet and recarpeting all these side panels, we just took some fabric dye and we re-dyed the color back into those panels. And as you can see, it looks awesome. Perfect for something that you're going to drive and enjoy. Now, if we were building a show vehicle, I would have replaced that carpet, but I would have also replaced the seat upholstery and the top. So it's important to remember what you're doing. We're going to talk about that more later on. All right, with the interior looking good, today we're going to move on to paint and body. And this is where most people's projects seriously go south, because the big question is always, do I leave it like it is, or do I completely repaint the vehicle? And one of those decisions is pretty cheap. The other can be very expensive and time-consuming, depending on how far you go with it. But they both fall within the realm of a level 2 project. So today we're going to walk you through that minefield and hopefully help you make the right decision for your project. Okay, the first thing that you should have decided when you started your project is what exactly is the goal here? I mean, are you building a race car? Are you building a show car? You building a daily driver, a beater, a rat rod? I mean, what is it? This is important. Don't overlook this, because there's an old saying, the nicer the nice, the higher the price. And there's a lot of truth to that. So every decision that you make on your vehicle needs to be weighed against what your ultimate goal is. For example, the goal here on the Jeepster is to have a nice, reliable driver that we can drive right now, but has moderate upgrades that don't take away from the originality, but it's still on a reasonable budget. Okay, with those in mind, now let's take a look at paint. Based off the overspray under the hood, this Jeep has been repainted before. The paint is faded and has its typical dings and scratches, but it's in reasonably good shape. There are the typical waves down the body that you find on old Jeeps, and mild door misalignment is also common. The latches, badges, and hinges all show typical pitting, and there are some small rust holes starting in the lower tailgate. Surprisingly, the usual problem areas like wheel wells and fenders are solid and show no signs of rust. However, the lower rocker panels not only have a few rust bubbles forming, but also show evidence of some questionable repair work where somebody riveted in a patch panel. So here's what we have. An average paint job done many years ago that's showing signs of wear. but it's in good enough shape that it could be buffed out and look presentable. The dilemma is that those rockers are going to need to be replaced eventually, and that is major surgery. Then once you replace those rockers, you're going to need to repaint the vehicle. Of course, we've already seen this has been repainted once, so the body is going to need to be stripped before you can paint it. Then if you're thinking, I'll just go ahead and pull the body off, bang, you just went to a level 4 restoration. And we've shown you what's involved in that. And just like that, a project can totally get out of hand, and it happens all the time. So the question is, do you have to replace those rockers now? And this goes back to what your goal is for the project. Obviously, if you're building a show vehicle, yeah, you have to replace those rockers and repaint the vehicle. But if you're building a nice driver like we are, no, you don't have to replace those rockers now. You can buff out the paint, get a nice rust preventative paint on those rockers and the other rusty areas and get that rust stopped, and then enjoy the vehicle for a few years until you are ready and your budget allows. Then you can pull it in the garage, take it apart, fix the rockers, paint it, and get it back out on the road. That's the approach we're taking on this one.
Metal. It's one of the key components of what we build and fabricate with. But if you can't shape it and cut it, you can't build with it. For over 50 years, Woodward Fab has been supplying the tools and technical advice to get the job done right. Bead rollers, brakes, shears, tubing benders. You'll find what you need whether you're a professional metal worker or just starting out. Woodward Fab, shaping metal since 1966.
Hey, welcome back to Gearz, where we are about to start buffing the paint on this old Jeep to see if we can bring it back to life. Now, obviously, you're going to want to have your top and your windows up before you buff a vehicle so you don't get a bunch of compound all over your new interior. Also, you want to have as many hinges and trim and badges off as possible because it's going to be a lot easier to maneuver that buffer around. This is where having a nice set of trim tools is going to come in handy. For the Jeep, most of the badges and headlight bezels and latches are available reproduction from the Jeepster man. So we're going to replace all of those, and Low Car has some really cool steering wheels and adapters for Jeeps, so we're going to upgrade that as well. All right, with the body clean of dust and dirt, we're ready to start. Now, if you have never buffed paint before, you're going to find it's very similar to the sanding process. You start with a more aggressive grit, and you work your way up to a finer grit. As you can see, I've got several buffs laid out here, from the more aggressive cutting wool buff to the finer polishing buff. And I've got a couple of compounds as well, a more aggressive cutting compound and a polishing compound. And the trick is to find the right combination. Sometimes it's a two-step process. Now keep in mind, our paint is faded and it's oxidized, but it's not completely dead. So we're going to start with the medium buff and the more aggressive compound. We're going to do a small panel and see how we like it, and we'll go from there. Now keep in mind, this is not perfect paint, so we're not looking for that. What we're looking is to make this look as nice as it possibly can. And keep in mind also, anytime you buff paint, you're actually removing paint. So be conservative in the choice of your buffs and your compounds, or you might end up looking at primer. All right, that takes care of compounds and pads. Now what about the buffer? That should be simple, right? Just grab one and go. No, it's not quite that easy. Look at this. These two are actually polishers. They feature a dual action head on them that not only orbits like this, but also freely spins. And they're designed so that you don't burn through your paint and they'll bring a nice polish out. But they do not cut and they do not remove swirls and scratch marks. For that, you need more of a traditional buffer like this. This is heavy, single action. Listen to the torque in that motor. These things are powerful, and they always are adjustable from 1,000 RPM up to about 5,000, so you can dial in the speed you want this thing to rotate. Now this is a grinder, but in spite of the fact it looks like the other tools, and it has the same arbor, so you could actually fit a buff on one of these things, you don't want to ever get this close to your paint, because you'll melt right through it and you'll destroy it. So it's important that you're using the right tool here.
If you like cars, if you like coffee, you're gonna love Gearz coffee cars. Because in each pack, you'll find a special blend of rich, robust coffee to get your blood pumping, as well as a collectible cartoon sticker and matching photo card of some of the wildest vehicles Stacey has built or featured over the years. Collect the whole series and be sure to keep an eye out for the ultra-rare Strange Brew card that are added to random packages to keep things interesting. It's Gearz coffee cars, the best bean on the car scene.
Hey, welcome back, where we are in the process of seeing if we can bring this old paint back to life. Now, why would you want to do something like this? Well, because buffing your paint is only going to cost you some materials and time. A complete paint job, on the other hand, is going to be thousands of dollars and a lot of time. So yeah, there's a lot of incentive to try to salvage your old paint. Now, as you can see, we've already buffed most of the vehicle and it's looking good, but that was the easy part. Now we're to the part that's always bad on a vehicle, the hoods and the roofs, because that's where the most sun damage happens. Now, obviously, we have a convertible here, so we don't have to worry about a top, but we do have to worry about the hood. So let me show you what the problem is and what we're trying to achieve here. Now, this panel has already been buffed, and as you can see, there is a very clear reflection of my hand in that paint, and that's what you want. But as you come up to this area on the cowl, notice that the reflection completely disappears, so we just have a shadow there. And you also have all kinds of oxidation and dead paint and scratches and watermarks, all kinds of stuff. So that all needs to be buffed off to bring that gloss back. Okay, with your pad damp, put some compound on the pad and you're ready to go to work. Now, you're going to want to use a slower speed here, about 1,000 RPM, 1,500, and work small areas and use a moderate pressure, because what you're doing here is cutting. You just slowly work the process and let the compound do the work. Now, after a while, start to lighten your pressure a little bit. What this does is it allows the compound to go from a cutting compound to a polishing compound. You should start to see some shine start to come up here. What you don't want to do, you don't want to let the pad get dry, and you want to buff this stuff until you feel the shine coming out. Slowly lighten your pressure, lighten your pressure. Now you're just letting the buffer go and do some polishing on it. And just before it dries, stop. Now, once you've buffed out a small area, stop and take a look at it. If you're still seeing scratches and hazes, you need to go to a more aggressive compound or a more aggressive buff. If it's looking good, continue to buff out the rest of the vehicle. Any place you can't reach with a buffer, that's going to need to be done by hand. Now, once again, starting out with moderate pressure to cut and then lightening up as you buff to bring out the gloss. Okay, once your buffing is done, you're ready to move on to your final polish and your wax. Now, obviously, you can put this on by hand, but it would also be the perfect time to move on to the polisher. Either one will give you a great result. The polisher is just going to save you some time. Okay, once the paint is buffed and polished, we'll finish it up by putting on the new trim and the badges. Okay, one final thing that you're going to have to address on a nice driver is the rubber and weather stripping, because it's almost always bad on an old vehicle. And as you can see, Jeepster Man has pretty much every piece of rubber and weather stripping, not only for the Jeepster vehicles, but pretty much any classic Jeep. And this includes door and window weather stripping, windshield, and all those little trim pieces that are impossible to find. Now, while we're talking about replacement parts, it's also a good idea, if you can afford it, to pick up any replacement parts that you might need down the road. For example, remember, this thing is going to need rockers eventually. Well, here is a replacement set of rockers. We'll just set those aside until we're ready to put them in. Also, if you think you're going to need floor pans, there they are, cross members, anything that you think you might need, now is the time to get it, because these parts might not always be available. Also, they're a great investment. If you ever go to sell the vehicle and you tell people you have replacement sheet metal, that's going to add value to the deal. And that is it. Now what we have here is a great example of a moderate level 2 style restoration that we can drive anytime, anywhere, and enjoy it. It's not going to take forever to do, and it's not going to break the bank. Also, these kind of projects are coming out of barns and garages all across the nation. So you have no excuse not to find yourself a project and start wrenching on it. You know, one of the first true freedoms you experience as a kid is that first bicycle. Man, it becomes your transportation to the world, or at least the local neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, man, we all had bikes. And we'd stick playing cards in the spokes, and we'd suck on black licorice, make it look like we were big biker dudes. And it was magic. But a bike wasn't just about transportation. No, it became an extension of your personality. And there were all kinds of bikes out there. There were 10 speeds, there were mountain bikes, there were Stingrays, there were BMX bikes, and they all had their strengths and weaknesses. And that's where the idea for the story of the purple bicycle came from. Because just like a bike might wish it had the talents or skills of another bike, so do we sometimes overlook our God-given talents and wish we had somebody else's talents, skills, because they seem to be better than ours. It's a simple lesson, but something we all need to be reminded of from time to time. You know, a while back, we introduced this 40 Chevy Coupe as a great way to showcase the potential of building a 30s or 40s car truck, because this was the original hot rod era. So we've loaded this thing with as many iconic brands and parts as possible, and we've had some very iconic builders give their opinion on what constitutes a real hot rod. And it's been a lot of fun. But what about the young, upcoming builders? I mean, they need to be involved too, because all that cool history doesn't mean jack if somebody doesn't carry it on. So for paint and body, we're going to send this thing off to the Hot Rod Institute and let some of the instructors and the students put some of their DNA into the Hot Rod Coupe. The Hot Rod Institute is located in Rapid City, South Dakota, and is the brainchild of Doug LaRue, with the goal of teaching students the skills to build high-end vehicles. Metal fabrication, painting, chassis work, interior work are just some of the things that you'll learn at the Hot Rod Institute, and we've used them on several of our projects, like the Rat Roaster, Heavy Metal, and the V8 Interceptor. So having the students at the Hot Rod Institute involved in a real hot rod project is a natural fit. However, if you're going to let somebody else touch your project vehicle, how do you make sure they're going to do exactly what you want? And how do you make sure that they don't get frustrated with you because they didn't understand what you wanted? Yeah, it takes communication, not just with your mouth. You got to write everything down on paper, and ideally, you need to write it on the car too. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Any trim or accessory holes that need to be welded up or filled, make sure they're plainly marked. Also, any custom metal modifications like louvers should not only be included, but also the location well marked on the panels so there is no question to where they go. Also, any special paint instructions need to be included as well. For example, this car is going to be black with flames coming out of the louvers and running down the door. But those flames are also going to continue in the cowl area here, so if we run it without the hood sides, those flames make sense. We're not going to use the original running boards, so the front and rear fenders will need to be bobbed off at the base to give us the right look. The rear fenders will also need to be widened a couple of inches to cover those wide Hallobrand wheels. Remember, car people are creative, so anything you don't want done, make sure that you mark it very clearly. And any areas that you want them to use their imagination, let them know that as well. Okay, once everything is marked on the car and written down on a corresponding list, now you're ready to load everything up and send it down the road.
What are you working on? Brought to you by Woodward Fabrication, selling quality metalworking equipment since 1966.
Today's What Are You Working On comes from Steven, and he is from Cheyenne, Wyoming. And his project is a 1965 Pontiac GTO. Yeah, look at this thing. Now the crazy thing on this, he says that he got it from a dealership in 1980 for $300. Even crazier than that, he still has it. Now he says that once he got it home from the dealership, he tore it down in front, rebuilt the front suspension, the brakes and the bushings, etc. And then for the engine, he rebuilt that thing, and then he picked up a 66 389 Tri-Power from his neighbor and put that on. As you can see, that looks awesome as well. Now at this point he says, what's missing? Well, it needs some body work. Says he's got some rust in the lower quarters that needs to be replaced, and he's got a trunk that needs a panel put in that. And he said he just really wants a driver, a local car show kind of car, and that's the best part. You can drive it now and enjoy it, just like we showed you today. And then when you get ready to do your paint and body work, then you do it. But I tell you, one of the coolest things about your car is that gas pedal that you got in there, that old barefoot gas pedal. That's awesome. Almost as cool as the hot foot. So to recognize such a cool project, Stephen, we're gonna give you one of these big bench vices from Woodward Fab. You'll use this more than you can imagine. Everybody needs a good vise. Then we're going to give you one of these Gearz fender covers, because that's always nice to have, whether you have nice paint or not. It protects your elbows. Also, we're going to give you one of these project planning books so you can keep track of everything that you've done to that car. And then finally, we're going to give you a Sergeant Rock die cast so you can be patriotic when you need to. Now, for the rest of you guys, if you want to get in on this and get your projects featured on the show, you got to send them to us. Go to our website, go to Gearz Nation, and submit it into What Are You Working On? The website's also the place to find out more information on any products you may have seen on the show, any Gearz merchandise, and how to join Gearz Nation. Also, make sure you check out our social media. That's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all at Official Stacey David. YouTube is also the place to view all of your favorite Gearz episodes, as well as the Gearz Restoration Series and our full project builds that follow a project from beginning to end. And finally, if you're a radio person, be sure and check out our podcast, Tales of a Gearhead. All right, that wraps it up for us today. Hopefully you've seen that a Level 2 project might be exactly what you want to do. If that's the case, you need to get out there and find yourself one. All right, we'll see you next time.